Okay, so it's kind of a magical moment today in the desert where it rained last night, and I don't know if the water that's falling behind me is visible on the video, but indeed there was quite a rainstorm last night, and this whole region has been under a kind of a serious drought, and so the rains came, and so the air is. The rain in the desert produces a certain particular kind of air that is like I have moisture coming out of my body and producing a kind of cloud. So it's really a spectacular morning here in Albuquerque, and I'm in the sun this morning, very bright sun, and I'm recording it earlier, so I'm not bathed in the shadow as I have been the last few days, which is good because as we move forward in the in the reading of the meditations that I wrote 10 years ago. We're now in the midst of a discussion of exploration and a jam on Socrates in Plato's Symposium, the famous dialogue on love. And so far we've seen a sort of step-by-step, we followed Socrates, who has moved into, from the porch, the veranda, the stoa, and the darkness of the porch and the stoa, into Agathon's house, has been greeted by Agathon, the host of the party. He sat down next to Agathon, and now he's begun to give his speech on love. And yesterday, we ended with the quotation from the Symposium, a piece of Socrates' speech, where he said, and I will find the quote in just a moment, I hope. Yep. Which now he is recounting the teaching from Diotima. He says, quoting her, "And turning his eyes toward the open sea of beauty, he will find in such contemplation the seed of the most fruitful discourse and the loftiest thought, and reap a golden harvest of philosophy, until, confirmed and strengthened, he will come upon one single form of knowledge, the knowledge of beauty I am about to speak of." So that's where we left it off. So let's see what Socrates says about this knowledge of beauty that comes upon the one who turns their eyes towards the open sea of beauty. By the time Socrates enters Agathon's house, he had long since been awakened by the tidings, which, Diotima says, arrive in the form of a revelation. Socrates had already received this revelation in the form of the saying of the message from the gods. This is the most essential meaning of revelatio, or revelatus, to reveal or unveil. Perhaps the most ancient of all sayings is the one denoted by revelatio. With this word, we speak of the unveiling, showing, and disclosure of the divine things, the gift, the promise, the covenant. With revelation, we speak of, quote, an act of revealing or communicating divine truth, especially God's disclosure or manifestation of himself or his will to man. That's a quote from a dictionary. Revelation is the most primordial of the sayings, for in this saying being unfolds and discloses the shining of appearance, the filling of the emptiness. Revelation is the radical confirmation of being within the horizon of beings. This confirmation comes in the form of communion that is communicated in the connection that discloses the interconnection of all that is. The togetherness of the horizon of being is understood against the backdrop of the apartness of being. For being always already exceeds this horizon in standing out in the saying, in speaking or shining forth. Revelation is the excess of being that draws our attention to the interconnection of all beings. In receiving this revelation, we are held out to the presencing of the present. This present is disclosed to us as a gift. This is the message as a gift from the gods. The present is the affirmation of life. This Diotima relates this doctrina, or teaching, to Socrates, as an initiation to the, quote, mysteries of love, unquote, that arrives to all who have been reposed and have been offered a golden harvest of philosophy. The cornucopia of this harvest strengthens and confirms upon those who receive it, quote, one single form of knowledge, the knowledge of beauty, of the ideal of friendship, which evokes the passion and desire to cultivate the connectedness between beings appearing in the horizon of existences. This vision of beauty marks the reception of what we might call an awakening of the congregation between earth, sky, wind, and water. Thus, the ultimate revelation arrives as a wondrous vision that, quote, does not take the form of a face or of hands or of anything that is of flesh. It will neither be words nor knowledge nor something that exists in something else, such as a living creature, or the earth, or the heavens, or anything that is, but subsisting of itself and by itself in the eternal oneness. While eerie lovely thing partakes of it, every lovely thing partakes of it, in such sort that, however much the parts may wax and wane, it will be neither more nor less, but still the same inviolable whole. That's from the Symposium 21a through b. According to Diotima, this revelation arrives from the beyond, from the nameless, the nothing, that subsists and remains beyond beings and being, the one that encompasses all that is, and is the condition for the possibility of being's processual unfolding. As the location both for beings appearing and disappearing, the beyond is the ultimate context, location, clearing, or topos. The disclosure that arrives at the disclosure of the beyond is received in the message that turns, tunes, and attunes. The message, like Hui Neng's declaration, quote, from first not a thing is, unquote, is received as the dismantling of the intellectualizing subject whose ego cogito has objectified the other as that which stands against. The gift of this saying, sage, quote, that once spoken it is so far still unspoken, unquote, is received by the one who is reposed, who has been released to hearing the saying of the gods. The one we call sage, the one who hears and in turn gives or passes on what he has heard. The sage is the hearer of the saying, sage. The sage emerges when the saying floods over and drowns the juridical voice. As Suzuki puts it, quote, when the saying from the first no thing is substituted from the self-nature of the mind, is pure and undefiled. All logical and psychological pedestals which have been given to one are now swept from underneath one's feet, and one has to know where to stand. And this is precisely what is needed for every sincere Buddhist to experience before he can come to the realization of the mind. The seeing is the result of his having nothing to stand upon, unquote. For the Buddhist, or for the philosopher, the evocative saying draws one into the unstable, shifting, and shaking ground of learning. What surfaces or shoots up from this ground, from the roots, is the teacher, or the sage, the giver, who, like Socrates, arrives at the conviction that, quote, I try to bring others to the same creed and to convince them that, if we are to make this gift our own, love will help our mortal nature more than all the world. And this is why I say that every person should worship the God of love. And this is why I cultivate and worship all the elements of love and bid others do the same. All my life I shall pay the power and the might of love such homage as I can. It's from Symposium 21:12. We learn from Socrates that worship of love has been the central motivation force for his wandering. Diotima's teaching framed his awakening. He has been captured and is in captivated. He has been captured, as in captivated in wonder, by the message received from the gods, the revelation that communicates divine truth. But in being turned around away from himself and towards the Hofstra as the subject who addresses him, the sage hears and passes on the saying of the other, and, as a sounding board, responds by offering his own revelatio, an act of revealing or opening to view, or discovering to others what was before unknown to them. In receiving and passing on the revelation and beauty of love, the sage reposes the other in questionableness, and through evocative speech estranges the other, allows her to see herself anew as the already not yet, and attuned to the love of learning. And through the exchange of evocative sayings, friendship as a wandering together, a purposeful sojourn with others, peregrinatio, is cultivated through a poetic thinking together, the giving and receiving of teachability, the letting be of the other, which reaps a golden harvest of community and fellowship. Wow, so that was from March 15th, 2004, read on this day, March 15th, 2014, 10 years later. And what happened here was quite interesting, right? So I sort of took a snippet of Socrates' speech in the Symposium, but I focused in the beginning on his speech as a conveying of revelation. So the focus here is on a category move to say, well, what is this speech that Socrates is making? And yesterday I talked about it as a retelling of a story. And in the summary I offered, I talked about it as a narrative, and the distinction between a narrative, a telling of a story, and the making of a speech that is rhetorically constructed in a way so as to persuade the listener. A story, I argued, isn't a talking at, but a talking with, because it allows the listener to be drawn into, and in a certain sense to, by analogy, relate to and try to understand better what is being told to them. In other words, they can fix themselves or find themselves in the story, the narrative. Whereas when listening to a speech, and the speech is speaking at one, and in a certain sense it's trying to direct one's attention through certain rhetorical moves in language. So there's the distinction here between making a sort of a rhetorical move and a persuasive speech and telling a story. And so what's happening then is we talked about Socrates' speech at the Symposium on love as really the telling of a story. But the telling of the story is, of course, the telling of the story of his encounter with Diotima and the relating of the doctrine that she taught him. And it's a powerful doctrine, right? And the last meditation ends with his talking about a vision of this sea of love, right? And then this metaphor of the sea of love becomes the powerful way of relating to the concept of what I talked about as the beyond. It's sort of the ultimate horizon, right? And talking about a sea or an ocean and thinking of standing somewhere where you can just see outward into the sea or the ocean on a beach or something, it just seems like it goes on and on and on and on and on, and it just, you know, that this sea is really what envelops, or this ocean really envelops the land. So in a way, the relationship, and this is what I tried to suggest, between call it the congregation between earth, sky, wind, and water, and I use wind because it's the movement of air as opposed to just air, and then the sky being the sort of ceiling. That congregation, in a certain sense, is really sort of mediated, and I guess I would reduce it to water, right? So there's something in this use of the sea or the ocean as the metaphor for sort of the ultimate material horizon, which would be like, you know, liquid or water or something like that. And I think I'm not going to digress too much on that, because I do think that going there is relevant to this work because of the sense of liquidity and the power of water and the movement of water. And I suppose I'm just also borrowing from this day where we have water in the desert that is always a special arrival, a special gift from the sky, if you will, to this desert area, particularly when there's been a drought. So the story then has a specifics to it, a content to it, which is the teaching of Diotima, and it's relating to this reducing philosophy and Socratic philosophy to love, capital L. So the reduction that happens with Socrates' work, his philosophy, is to love. Right? So this becomes the ultimate, the fundamental. So it's reduced to love, and it's fundamental as well as being expansive. There's nothing greater than it, right? So you think of Anselm's proof of the existence of God. It's that which no greater can be thought. So the reduction of philosophy, Socratic philosophy, is to love. That's the content of the speech. The form of the speech is actually what I'm most interested in this particular meditation. And what I'm calling this form is revelatio, right? So I use the Latin here to talk about the telling of the story as a telling of a revelation, right? So it's a retelling or it's a re-revealing. It's a re-revealing of a revelation. So Diotima had a revelation, and she is then relating this to Socrates. And what's important then is that form and content sort of collapse, because the form of revealing through the narrative is also drawing our attention to the way in which one encounters the fundamental, which is love. So it's not through a philosophical reduction, but in fact it's through a primary or originary experience with love itself. So what philosophy then does is it mediates that effacement with the fundamental. So it doesn't bring it to, it brings it to our attention in the sense that it draws us to it. And that's what a revelation does. A revelation points to and reveals something and then draws us into it. But it's the experience with that which we're drawn into and pointed to that is the fundamental, not the revelation itself. But the form and content collapse because the revelation is drawing our attention to the nature of love as presencing, as what I'm going to later call ceaseless nativity. So it happens that the way of being is revelatio, right? And so it is the collapse of form and content. So for me, drawing attention to the form of the saying, and so of course now we're talking further about saying, and then the saying of the revelation as the saying of the philosophy, the tale, the narrative, as a revelation is very important here. So revelatio, revelatus, to reveal or unveil, is denoted by revelatio. So that's very important. And then finally, I play with this notion of saying and sage, because the German word saying is S-A-G-E, sage. But clearly when you read it, and you don't know German, if you were just to read that as an English reader or an English speaker, you would understand that, it would look to you as if it were the word sage. So saying and saging then is, in a sense, again, a collapse of form and content. The content being the saying of the story, the revelation, and the form of it. Really, now, form in the sense of modality of persona is one of sage. So the saying is communicated through the form of the sage, the persona of the sage. And I believe this is only the second or third time that I'm referring to the sage, but of course the sage then becomes the persona or the form of the philosopher that will move throughout the experiment, and ultimately will be the sort of key figure of the philosophical educator, if you will, or the one who draws attention or reveals. So, okay, so on the day of rain, or the day after the rain, that is it, from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and March 15th, 2014.